Hi everyone, and welcome to Chandon. This is a virtual visit to our lovely estate here in the heart of the Yarra Valley. As I'm walking down here to where we're going to have a little tasting, I might just talk a little bit about the history, because Chandon's been an integral part of the sort of renaissance of the Yarra Valley, being the first really ambitious and international commitment to this amazing wine region. Obviously, the history goes back beyond us. The history goes back even to the 19th century at Yering Station, and Yeringberg have been here a long time, and Seville Estate as well. But it was really in the 80s that Chandon, and at the same time Coldstream Hills was establishing, and that really started to put this region on the map. And rightly so, because the Yarra Valley's got so much to offer. You know, we have a great diversity of climate. The still wines here for Pinot Noir and Chardonnay are really world class, as well as the Cabernet. And I'm just here standing 500 metres away from the Yeringberg vineyard, where they make some of the finest Cabernets anywhere. We're only a few k's away from Mount Mary as well. So there's so much to offer in this little part of the world. And at this time of year, it being autumn, it's spectacularly beautiful. It's probably my favourite time of year. I think it's a combination of the vintage being finished and I can get some sleep, but also the colours and the light at this time are just spectacular. The vineyards are all yellow and orange. The evening light is just so beautiful on the mountains, and it makes this just one of the greatest places to work. So as we're coming around here, I was actually here in 1986 when Chandon was being established. I was a pimply-faced teenager. I had a summer job working for a vineyard contractor and was out here in the vineyard installing the irrigation at that time. So I didn't know at the time that 30-something years later I'd be back here heading up the winemaking operations, but here we are. So we're going to cross to Leanne Altman, who's one of Melbourne's great sommeliers. Leanne buys wine for restaurants like Cumulus and Supernormal, as well as Cutler & Co. So an enormous experience and depth of knowledge, and so once we get the camera worked out, we'll be able to look at her and conversation. I'm going to open the bottle.
Hi.
Hi. How you going?
I'm ready for a glass of Chandon.
Excellent. So here I've got the Chandon S, which is one of the newest wines we've been making. Chandon S was an idea that we had about 5 years ago to make a wine that would sort of stretch into that spritz, late afternoon drink kind of category. And so it took us a while. It was about 18 months to develop a recipe for our own orange bitters. That was quite an experience and pretty cool fun, actually.
Where do you start? Where do you start?
Well, yeah. We went back to the original champagne cocktail, and as you know, that has bitters on a sugar cube with a little bit of cognac in it. So we thought bitters were interesting, and then we saw some orange bitters from a producer in the States, and we thought maybe we can have a go at making that. So we did infusions with all the citrus, all the fruits we could find, all the spices we could buy at the Indian spice shop, soaking in brandy spirit, and after a while, it slowly developed into the recipe for our orange bitters. The bittering agent's gentian root, and that has a really interesting effect on the palate because it makes the wine, well, bitter. But normally we try not to make wine bitter, but in this case, it's got a really nice effect because it makes the finish a bit more like a gin and tonic or a beer, and it's very, very more.
And you like it on ice. How do you balance that in the winemaking process? Obviously, when you're putting the cuvee together, is that quite difficult, challenging to look at the sugar and the acid balance and how that works with ice?
Yeah, so we do have a little bit more sugar in this one. It's a demi-sec kind of level, but as it's ice cold, literally, it sort of works. And the bitterness also needs that to sort of balance it, I suppose.
Yeah.
Way less sugar than most spritz you would find on the cocktail list, but just enough to give it that balance, and cinnamon, cardamom, ginger, vanilla, spice, just to give it that background. It's a sort of a think about Christmassy flavours that go with orange, and it works really well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Sometimes I think of myself as a serious winemaker, and doing stuff with orange bitters was all a bit crazy at the time, but I think the result's been really awesome, and just drinking it is such a pleasure. And for afternoon drinks and warm summer afternoons, or even a nice autumnal afternoon like this, it's a really nice thing to have.
One of those a little bit too easy to drink problems that you can have.
Exactly.
Especially when you are and that view. It's amazing.
Yeah. So at home, we say you need a Magnum just to be sure you've got enough, because it tends to disappear pretty quickly. So.
Did you make it in a Magnum? That'd be amazing.
We do, yeah, but they're just for sale here. So, yeah, possibly through our website. I'm not sure. But they're limited numbers anyway, and most of the winery team take them before anyone else gets a go.
You've got to have some perks.
Exactly.
It's a good excuse to get out there when we're allowed to again.
Yeah, exactly. The next one I've got here is Vintage Brut Rosé, which is a personal favourite. I've got questions for you, Leanne.
Oh, God, yes.
Flutes or wine glasses?
Wine glasses.
Perfect. Okay. So we don't have to fight it.
But, it's not... In the restaurant, I always offer, particularly for non-vintage styles, but most people will go with the flute. But I think as people progress to vintage and rosé and smaller producers, I love drinking out of a wine glass champagne. I haven't quite gotten to the stage where some people are drinking out of a burgundy glass, but a white wine glass is good for me.
We use burgundy glasses at home, but it might just be my big nose. But these little flutes are, I think they're a bit old-fashioned. So
yeah, me too.
So another question with Asian food. What's your thoughts about that with bubbles? Because I have a personal passion for Asian food, and I really love drinking wines like this. Yum cha, Thai food. I find the acidity really works with it.
Yeah, one of the things that I love, and I think one of the things that there was a request for the label. One of the things that I find challenging about Asian food and exciting is that, particularly when we opened Supernormal, there's no beverage culture, wine culture to go back to. So if you open an Italian restaurant, your first port of call is Italian varieties and Italian wine styles. Yeah. For Asian food, it's about texture and savouriness, maybe. And I think that's one of the reasons why I love sparkling wine with Asian food. It's one of the reasons why I find it the most difficult style of wine to judge, because you're not just talking about fruit and structure, but you've also got that extra complexity that comes from bottle aging and then the textural component of the mousse. But that's what makes it so fantastic and flexible with a lot of Asian food. So things that particularly have a quite high sort of richness, like oilier texture, all those sort of soft textures. It's really fascinating, but also the umami Lee's autolysis character, I think, works really well.
Yeah,
like
that's what
it's playing around and experimenting. So not every wine goes with every dish.
I think that's one of the great and most interesting dimensions to sparkling wine making, is that the second fermentation and the yeast element makes it technically really hard. But it also adds that umami, and it's a totally different dimension to wines. I mean, I love making red wine, and there's sort of the fruit element that goes into that, but the yeast element in sparkling makes it a really interesting and challenging wine to make. And plus it takes so long.
Yeah.
I
don't know how you have the nerve for it personally.
Yeah, well, it's almost impossible to take notes that you can refer back to in 5 or 6 years' time and wonder what you were thinking at the time. So, yeah, it takes a while to develop that pattern, I suppose.
I think as well the idea that, I mean, for me, if you look at oak, for instance, oak is like a seasoning, the way you'd season food, and ideally. But I think the Lee's autolysis character, Lee's aging character, gives that seasoning as well, and an extra level that makes it really interesting for food. I mean, I do enjoy offering people pairings through the meal that are sparkling, but it's maybe more challenging sometimes to get people to do it.
I remember the first time I went to Champagne, I was blown away in a restaurant. They wanted to serve only champagne through the whole degustation. Yeah. That's really cool. I like that. So.
It's really cool. But that's like this style, so vintage rosé, has so much flexibility. And I mean, I love the Champenois, but I would have to disagree with their love of rosé with dessert. For me, it's light red meats and veal and pork and game and things like that with this style of wine, which has quite a lot of intensity and complexity from the lees aging.
Totally.
Do you have a favourite pairing for it?
With this, sometimes on my way home, I stop at Victoria Street and buy one of those roast ducks that hang in the window in the Vietnamese shops. Yeah. And this is my go-to for that.
That is a strong yes for me. So what was, 2015, can you tell me a bit about how you saw 15 for sparkling wine in the Yarra?
Dream vintage for us. If I could have 15 every year, I'd be delighted. It was no significant disease problems. We had beautiful weather right through autumn, long, slow ripening. The grapes were spot on in every way. And the wines we've made and the wines from my neighbours here as well, the Pinot and Chardonnay particularly, were really fine and had the right level of intensity without being over the top. So been, really cool. The 16 and 17 have been great too, but I think I've got a really warm spot for the 15s. I'm really delighted with that season. At 5 years old too, they're still super fruity and fresh. But just slowly developing that complexity that comes with bottle age. Yeah.
Do you think that the Yarra has like a defining style for sparkling wine, or do you think that it's more driven by the producer style?
It's a bit of both. It comes back to diversity here, and I think that's why the Yarra is such an awesome place, because there's so many different climates and microclimates that it depends where your fruit comes from and when you want to harvest it. So we're looking for to really celebrate the fruit flavour that comes with these grapes in Australia. That's something that's a notable difference between Yarra Valley and Australian fruit to other places. So I don't want to sort of suppress that with all the yeasty complexity that you can do with sparkling wine. And I don't want to overwhelm people.
That a lot of producers in Champagne are doing as well, as they concentrate on the quality of fruit, concentrating less on those yeasty characters and the oxidative aging characters.
Yeah, so if you're patient, you can age wine. Anyone can do that. And in fact, inferior grapes age faster. So the trick for us is to have that sort of awesome fruitiness and that really respect the grape's origin, I suppose, and then layer that up with subtlety and complexity rather than just want to pump it as yeasty as possible.
Yeah, obvious.
Got Peter here saying the Chandon S is delicious. Good on you. That's great. This is cool. Yeah.
It's good. Drink along. I like that.
Yeah.
So how does Chandon Victoria compare to the Chandon estates in other countries? Do they have particular styles that are definitive, or would you say that they're defined by Chandon style?
The South American wines are a little bit different. The Brazilian wine, they use some different varieties.
They're sweeter as well, right? Lots of residual sugar?
More sugar in the Brazil wines, and they have this Italian Riesling variety, which is something I'd never seen before, which has a slightly different flavour. The similarity between Chandon, California and Australia is quite notable, and the similarity between Chandon, Australia and China is also interesting, because we've had over the years winemakers from here visiting there and helping out. Amazing. So they've, I suppose, taken a lot from what we do. In a blind tasting, I was caught out a little while ago tasting it, the comparison, and I thought the Chinese wine was the Australian and got them back to front. A little bit embarrassing, but anyway.
Well, complimentary.
Now, you can buy wine directly through the Chandon website or through the Yarra Valley Wine Growers Association. There's a link on the Yarra Valley Wine Growers Association homepage where people can jump on and get involved in this sales we're doing to support the local region. So just answering your question as it came up. Zinfandel We don't have any Zinfandel here. They do have Zinfandel in California. They make a sparkling Zinfandel. It's a fairly heavy style of wine and probably
Chandon.
better suited to the American. Chandon do, yeah.
Really? Wow. I'm slightly traumatized by a sparkling Zinfandel because I got it in an exam blind once and I didn't know what it was. And I had loads of sugar and never want to taste it again.
It's a pretty confronting kind of wine. And
yeah.
I'm trying to say nice things. But, yeah.
Perfect.
We make sparkling red with Pinot and Shiraz, and that's a nice sort of layer of our French heritage, but the Australian heritage as well. And that's tremendously popular here at Salvador.
Yeah, it's funny. We don't sell loads of sparkling red in the restaurants, but there's always a little spike around Christmas. But it's challenging, and I think I prefer the styles that have a little bit more lightness and freshness than maybe that really big, rich.
Yeah, definitely. And for me too, it's the joy factor in sparkling rosé and blanc wines is certainly the bit that I find most compelling. So,
do you have any?
Do you want to reintroduce Leanne?
Yeah, so for people who've just joined, I'm talking with Leanne Altman. She's one of Melbourne's top sommeliers who works with restaurants like Cumulus and Supernormal and Cutler and Co. So, yeah, we're just having a bit of a chat about sparkling wine and the beauty of the Yarra Valley.
How amazing is it? So great.
Yeah. It's a beautiful
and such an amazing time of year to be there as well, when everything starts turning yellow. Gorgeous.
Gorgeous, yeah.
So great. So tell me a bit about the production of the rosé.
The rosé, well, we do the assemblage method, so it has a tiny bit of red wine added to the base blend, but we really want to pimp the Pinot Noir character. Like for me, Pinot is one of probably the greatest grape of all in terms of charm and finesse and generosity at the same time. And so making rosé sparkling is really about trying to enhance and show off what Pinot can do. We like to joke about it. If you've seen that Simpsons episode where Lisa's telling Homer that all his favourite food come from the same animal, and
Yes.
all my favourite wines come from Pinot Noir in the same sort of way. You know, it can make Blanc, rosé, and of course the great red wines, and some of the greatest red wine anyone will ever have made with Pinot. So that's pretty
Your
cool.
desert island variety.
Exactly. So thanks for joining me, Leanne. We might wrap it up
Thank
there.
you.
Yeah.
Fabulous. Thank you.
Good chatting.
A quick recap of the wine.
Lots of agreement in the comments about Pinot being the best variety.
Yeah, Pinot is king. That's good to see. So, yeah, we've tasted the Chandon S tonight and Chandon Vintage Brut Rosé. So there's the Chandon S, available in the current pack that's selling through the Yarra Valley Wine Growers, and Chandon Vintage Brut Rosé, which will also be available in coming packs, I'm told. And you can jump on the website, as I said before. So there's a link on the Yarra Valley Wine Growers homepage. So good to have you with us.
A little bit of 2015.
Cheers.
Cheers.